Welcome to the World Builders Anvil, episode 175. Today's topic, storyboarding. It's not just for the movies. Don't know where to start building your fantasy world? Do you need more? Does it make sense? Forget any worries and become a crafter of imagination. This is the place that will help prime your mind. Now, it's time to heat up the forge, break out the mithril ingots and hammer. Welcome to the World Builders Anvil. I'm your host, Jeffrey W. Ingram. Let's sup from the mug of Java and build.
Welcome back. As always, I am your host, Jeffrey W. Ingram.
And I'm Michael Fast Track Miller.
I love how you keep pulling back to Fast Track. Every now and then, you got to throw that back in there.
At least I didn't call myself Mike Fast Track Miller.
I am glad of that. You know what we should do? You want to do a show one of these times where I pretend to be you the entire time I try to copy your mannerisms and your lack of intelligence? It's really going to be... I'm going to have to dumb it way down.
Well, the problem would be you'd have to be able to actually handle the material, though. And
Welcome to the show. I am your co-host, Michael Miller.
And I'm Jeffrey Fast Track Ingram.
Shouldn't it be something with a W? Like Wet Track Ingram?
That's, I think, from a porn movie.
That's what you say? That's your porn name? Is that what you said?
That's my porn name.
That's your Wet Track Ingram?
Wet Track Ingram.
Fast Track doesn't make me sound very good if that's my porn name.
Oh, I left my water downstairs.
Oh my gosh. Welcome to the show.
That's right. Hello, world.
Hey, guys.
Hey,
I'm tearing up over here. So, welcome to the Anvil After Dark. As generally always these days, it is a Thursday afternoon. I wouldn't call it evening anymore since we're getting into the springtime hours. The sun's still up, which is kind of nice. But today we're talking about storyboarding. And a lot of people, when you hear storyboarding, you think of movies, television shows, or even comic books. Not a lot of people consider storyboarding to be hand in hand with novels, and we're here to tell you that that's just not so. Yeah,
no, storyboards are something used by like lots of different industries. I used it in web design. I know marketers use it. Obviously, like any visual media is sort of the bread and butter because you're doing a lot with it in visual media. But you can use storyboarding too, and really sort of the idea for this episode came about when people were talking about, sort of like not seeing their way through the stories. And I guess, I don't know, it's just the way my brain works is like I see the stories happening as I'm writing them. And I don't think everyone can. So, but if you can visualize it, then it'll be easier to write. Because you're not really transcribing, but essentially you have an idea of the flow of movement of things that are happening. So, Michael, being a movie guy, did not suggest this because he didn't think about it. But I was just thinking about
Jeff, I am doing so much thinking, just like holding the world together and maintaining the balance of reality and the timeline. You realize that I hold all of that together by my sheer cognition. So I don't always have the time to do all the things that you have time to do, not working full time, maintaining reality like I do.
Well, I didn't say you didn't have a good reason. I just said you just didn't do it.
Oh, fair enough. I agree.
Yeah. Fair enough. Society's to blame. Right. I'll put the rest of them then.
Always.
Okay. But, the thing to keep in mind is, how can we adapt something like storyboarding to novels? Because obviously there are a lot of things that you don't need to do that you would in a normal storyboard. Obviously, if you're not an artist, it's going to look horrible. Like I did a storyboard out just messing around, and my stick figures were violent. They were very violent, but not necessarily things I would necessarily share out with the world. But the thing is, they don't need to be. They just need to convey the sense of scenes from your book. And so, let's start getting into what storyboarding is and how to adapt it for a book. That way, if you're struggling, you can literally. What I would just do is get like printer paper, put it up on the wall, and just start drawing pictures. Unless you could draw on your own walls, in which case you wouldn't need that. But so the idea is books are made up of scenes, much like movies are, much like video games are made up of scenes. So the idea is, where are your scenes, and to start sketching out certain things that happen within them. And what I would like to think of is sort of like you're going to have either one board per scene, or if it's a complicated scene, you might actually have multiple boards laid out. There are a few things you're going to need within the board. If it's like largely a dialogue scene, you're not worried about some of the things, like I said, movies are worried about. So you don't care about how the camera's moving necessarily, but you care about reactions. What's the emotion of the scene? Does this person have like big bloodshot eyes because they're crazy? What are the visual elements that are important to the scene? And the idea is, you're going to need at least one per scene. You're going to have at least one scene per chapter, sometimes multiple scenes per chapter. It depends on how you write. But essentially, you just start drawing out the characters who are in the scene. If they're important, like reveals and emotions that happen, you want to illustrate those in a way that makes sense to you.
The thing that I really like about this concept is it can impress where you want the reader's eyes to be. So if you, and what Jeff's saying about the art there, it's not something like you don't need to sit down and go crazy. I mean, if you want to go crazy with the art, go for it. You could use it for something else later, but it's really a visualization tool. So let's say for sake of argument, we have a non-action sequence, because action sequences, you can do a lot of different things with storyboarding to help clarify what you need to write. But let's say it's literally two people sitting across the table from each other just talking. Okay, you don't need a whole lot to storyboard there, but storyboarding can show you things that you might not have considered. So you write down, you make a little drawing, a couple stick figures sitting across from a table. Well, how do you want the reader to access this scene? Do you want them to be over the shoulder of one of the people in the conversation so that it's a real intimate feel? You got them close right in on the conversation. Or do you want it to be almost voyeuristic, like they're over at the other side of the diner, but they can overhear the conversation, and maybe they shouldn't? Have you ever read something? And I'm asking you, the listener, to consider this, and I'm also asking Jeff specifically. Have you ever read something where you almost felt like you were invading the scene? Because I have. Yeah, no, I have to say, some books do that really well. It's not an easy thing to do, but the point is
it's difficult. I think it's difficult to do in words to make it feel like you're being a voyeur. It's much easier to tell a story through the actions and reactions of people as in respect to each other. But from a third person perspective, you could definitely distance it a little more than normal and have it feel like you're almost following them.
The point here is
maybe you are.
the storyboard grants you an access to a possible perspective you may not have been considering. And it also points out things like, if you're going to just do a little basic, okay, two people across from a table, and you start considering, well, what else is in the room? Where are they? What could be there? If you're just thinking about that as a concept, two people at a table talking in a diner, okay, well, these are the things that would be there. But then when you start to draw it and you're like, oh, this would also be there. This would also be there. They'd also have this there. You're going to, it opens up, basically, it's just a new perspective that might reveal something that you weren't thinking about as an idea until you put it visually.
Yeah, and you start off with this two people having a conversation scene into two people in a kitchen doing it, and one of them keeps getting distracted by the pie. because it's pie and they're like really impressed with the pie. They want to eat the pie, but they don't want to be rude during the conversation, but they're only half paying attention. You can start working in those kind of elements because you're just drawing stuff out to flesh out a scene, and you might not even include all of the stuff that does it, but you start finding new details that you didn't see before because you're taking the time to sort of draw out where they're at. What are the types of things around them? Would either of the characters be distracted by those things? And I think the other important thing too is I think you kind of need a sheet covering the bigger emotions that happen during a conversation. So, if it's argumentative, is a guy a frothing at the mouth kind of argumenter? Is he the very stoic jerkwad argumenter? I mean, how do they look? Record yourself sometime having a conversation with someone about something you're both passionate about, and you don't have to disagree with it, but just record it. Look at the facial features, and this is a big reason too why I'm a fan of like going out in public. Is it's like when you're out to eat, you can see two people having a conversation, and then I internalize I'm being voyeuristic. I don't care what they're talking about, but I care about what they're doing. Do they fidget? What are the small details about that scene that I'm observing that I could then ingest and possibly reuse it sometime?
We're kind of going a little out of order here on the show notes.
Yes.
I don't want to. Yeah. Well, I don't want to. I don't want to derail if you have a specific order here, because your next bullet point after one board per scene is a big one. So I don't know if you want to get into that.
I actually do want to go back to that because
the one board. Board per scene. You want to go back to or?
Wrapping up with one board per scene, I want to move on now to show the action of the scene, and I think this is really important, especially if you have a really complicated fight scene. I think, and I'm only thinking about this because Mike brought up fight scenes when we were chatting about it earlier, and it's a good point. But when there's real action happening, and it could just literally be, once again, a conversation where one of the people is hovering around the room. How are they standing in relationship to the person? Are they up close? Are they big chested, trying to sort of intimidate? These are the things that you can sketch out, or the movements, during a certain part of the conversation. An intimidation factor could be to walk up to someone who's sitting down and getting a little too close for their comfort. And you can kind of map those things out and just sort of get the flow of the action in your head, so you don't sit there and struggle trying to figure out what the next action is. And then you go back and read it and go, this doesn't make any sense because, one guy was in an alleyway and he was at the back of the alleyway and he was talking to another character. The other character started to walk away and he grabbed him and pulled him back 40 feet into the back of the alleyway. For a normal person, that would be an impossible task, but it's something that can happen if you're just writing out action as they happen. So
yeah, it's easy to create a contradiction, I think, is what you're getting to.
Yeah, exactly.
So with storyboarding out, and especially we did a whole episode just on fight scenes, and we talked about storyboarding in that episode. Because we could take up a whole episode just talking about action sequences, but I think the important things to note here, without eating up the whole show on this one thing, is that when you lay it out, when you storyboard it or even create a miniature map, you might discover that how you intend to write it isn't physically possible, or you might forget a detail or find a detail. I know when I write out an action scene, for me, I think about things like a movie. I approach it from a very visual standpoint. So I think about distances, size of rooms, lengths of hallways, how many doors. I wrote a sequence in a hallway, and it was a small action sequence in a hallway, and I considered the kind of house it is, and thus how many doors would be in that hallway, and the relation of one bedroom door to another, because the person goes back and forth between two bedroom doors.
Yeah.
And thus the distances, and like, could this happen? You know, if this person is shooting their arm this way, can that door open in a way that makes it work? Like, you have to consider these things. At least I think that you have to. I mean, certainly you can just write it willy-nilly and be that way, but I think the importance of storyboarding it gives it a layer of reality, because you can justify all the action without creating a contradiction that, while the reader might not quite notice it, sometimes you'll read something and you won't quite pick it up on a conscious level, but you're like, that doesn't sound right. Like, could he? Yeah. And then you start getting conscious because you start questioning it. And as soon as they start questioning it, it pulls them out of the flow. And you don't want to. You don't want to do that. And
I think too, it depends on how you deliver the action. It's like when I do fight scenes, I want them to be kind of hazy. Very short, very crisp, but hazy, because it's just like bam, bam, bam.
What do you mean by hazy? That's kind of a weird word to use when you say you use crisp and hazy. So what do you mean?
Well, crisp as in like short, written,
swift.
Swift flowing kind of thing. So crisp in language.
Okay.
But hazy in the people involved aren't really super aware of the things happening around them. It's like, an action sequence, for a 3 or 6 second action sequence is probably the length of most fights. So it's wham, bam, and fog of war, especially like if you're in a kind of a melee situation, it's not beyond that person, and so I try and get that in there. So I don't have a lot of details about anything else that's not really within the world of the two people who are engaged, except for one of my characters who's special, but where to him it's all slow and he can almost like walk through the scene while it's happening. But for other characters, it's just kind of like flash, bam, wow, fight just happened. And, so it's like, I don't get heavy into the action of the fight, a few swift motion kinds of things will happen, and that's about it. And that's just the way I like to do it. But if you want a very technically delivered fight sequence, you really have to be cognizant, and it gets more to, it's like if someone with the spear is fighting someone with the dagger, how does he bridge that distance to get within the scope of the spear and be able to actually even engage that person? So there are lots of things you can work out with. And I think for action specifically, it's very useful to storyboard out multiple boards to show the flow of action. But I think even when you get into just a conversation, if it's a heated conversation, if you want a lot of emotion, make that the action of the scene.
Your spear example makes me think of like, okay, you've got a character in a crowded Roman gathering, and then guards come in to then, threaten that guy with a spear, and they thrust at him with the spear. Well, it's all right. Well, just a second ago you said it was a crowded, so it's like shoulder to shoulder. So you start drawing that, and you realize, oh, they can't really thrust at him, and if he dodges, they're going to stab another person because there's so many people around. So you need to add a little description there that as the guards approached, the crowd backed away from the one person they were approaching, and now you've opened up room for your scene to occur. You know what I mean? So that's...
Or maybe you want to show the brutishness of the guards. You have them dodge, and they just stab the person, kick the person off, and keep going at him.
Right.
So you can get into completely different dynamics, but you kind of need to understand that, like you said, if it happens in a crowded room, there's other things you have to let the reader know about.
Well, absolutely. My point there is the discovery of a detail in the storyboarding.
Yeah, and you most definitely, like Mike said, we could spend a whole episode just talking about the different dynamics of a fight scene. So I don't want to spend too much more time here, but I think he's completely correct. And that's the neat thing with storyboarding is all the things you put down won't necessarily even turn into words, but it might actually even inspire new things that you hadn't thought about, which will even layer in more details to make it a little bit more memorable scene than it would have been otherwise.
So what kind of things should they not worry about?
Art. Don't worry about the art unless you're an artist. Like if you can actually sketch it out, make it look decent. I would actually take time and sketch it all out, and you can actually use that to help build up interest. You could share that out through an email newsletter. There are a bunch of things that you could do with the art if it's like not horrific. If it's my stick figure art, it's not going to be very useful, but you never know. But in general, don't worry about it. It's not about the quality of the artwork here. It's like you don't have to go hire someone who has artistic skill to do storyboards. You're just trying to use the storyboard as an excuse to visualize the scene. Because I think one of the places we get stuck when we're writing sometimes is we're trying to translate what's happening into words, but we can't see it. And if we can't see it, it's very hard to do that because then you get stuck looking for the perfect word and for the next action. So there's like multiple things you can get stuck on at that point. And I think the other thing that you don't have to worry about, even though you could definitely adapt it if you wanted to, is you don't need to worry about sort of like camera transitions or actions. You know, you're not worried about like you're fading from this scene into the next scene. But maybe you do adapt that and say, how do I transition from this chapter to the next chapter? Or so you might adapt it a little bit, but you don't need to worry about stuff so much like the transitions for the camera or specific actions of the camera, the stuff that you would need if you were doing movies.
Yeah, like
Michael would probably know a lot more about why you would storyboard that kind of crap out.
Yeah, like if you're familiar with the 180 degree rule, you don't need to follow that here, because you're going to be talking, you're going to be wording through the scene as opposed to camera picturing through the scene. So I mean, you don't need to worry about those visual types of limiting rules. They're there for a reason, but they're there for movie reasons, not for book reasons.
Yeah.
So
really,
go ahead.
The transitions and stuff you want to do are really things that are relevant to the storytelling. And sometimes you do things in choppy ways, and you can still visualize those out in storyboards. You know, like you want a close up onto someone's eye as they're being told that like their spouse was murdered by the king. Exactly. You might still storyboard something like that out, which normally I don't worry even about the depth of field unless it's important and I think it's relevant to sharing the emotion of the story.
There are photographers in our audience that their eyes are rolling into the back of their head when you say you're not worried about depth of field. You're not worried about depth of field.
You're so unrealistic. But in a way, you know, there are things that you should worry about. And it's the actions, the reactions, and the emotion. And not just of the characters, but of the story. You know, what kind of emotion are you trying to convey? Is the perspective that you're sharing on a scene going to convey an emotion through it? You know, or is it just three guys who are standing up talking blankly to each other and there's like nothing else really there? And there are reasons to do that too. But you know, that's where you're down to one storyboard for a scene. But if you're trying to convey emotion, how do you do that? It's in movement. It's, you know, most human interaction linguistically has to do with nonverbal communications. You know, storyboard that kind of stuff out. And it doesn't have to look great. You just have to understand what it means.
One of the most powerful things about impressing a moment for the reader, and this is also definitely true of visual mediums, is actually coming from comic book. What's the word I'm like? Techniques, but it certainly works in the literary world as well. You can have a huge impact on the reader's experience, not so much by the action of a given thing, but by the reaction of the people that it's happening to. I'm immediately reminded of a very very specific movie reference, but you can certainly, again, this could absolutely translate to a story, to a writing project. The movie, The History of Violence, there's a lot of, as the title would suggest, there's a lot of violence in that movie. Not an extravagant amount, but there is a number of parts in the movie where it's graphic. But for me, the most impactful piece of violence in that movie is when one person slaps another. And the reason is because of the reaction. It's not because of the action, because there are guys that get blasted with shotguns. There's a guy who gets smashed in the face with a glass coffee pot. Like, there's some really nasty violence in that movie. But that's
brutal kind of stuff.
But but that slap is so heavy because of the reaction that the characters have to the moment that things just stop and they're like, oh my gosh. So when you're writing your action and when you know this is important, like the king stabbing his brother is not important just because it's a monarch stabbing a fellow lord. It's not just important because it's a brother stabbing a brother, but there's this whole other thing going on. And you show that whole other thing, like the most important thing is the reaction because the son of the brother or the daughter of the brother is there to witness it. And in no world possible did they believe that their uncle, the king, could kill their father for any reason. And it's such a betrayal and such a big thing. And you sell that by the character's reaction to the occurrence. You sell that and really, punch the reader by that, not by viscerally describing the blade cutting through his stomach while he guts the guy. Like, yeah, sure, that's going to have an impact. I'm not saying it won't.
But it's a different impact.
But it's a different impact. So, like, you have so much power with that emotion, with that the reaction description. So,
or just think about this too. If you do not add in the reaction, it's kind of like when people see, you don't have the field of perception that you think you do with your eyes. It'll cut off. Like if you move your fingers back behind your eyes, they'll disappear even though you think you can still see in that direction. And it's because the brain has a way to fill in details. So if you don't add it in, the brain of the reader might add it in and it might be the wrong perception. For example, it's like if you wanted to show the callousness of a society and someone got killed in the streets and the people just keep walking and someone's sitting there like holding their gut, begging for help, and people just are ignoring the person, that would say a lot about that society, about that street. But if you don't take the time to describe the lack of reaction, which you would still want to describe there, because that's their reaction, is like, oh, well, that's your problem. Or the one that really comes to my mind right now is how many movies, or television shows today are there scenes of a terrorist attack where, a terrorist thing will happen, a bomb will go off, someone will start shooting, the crowd will scream and they'll start running away. And TV and movies, a lot of times it'll be sort of jagged as almost like, it's elevating this like panicked attempt to escape. Compare that to if you've ever seen the movie Brazil. I believe it was Brazil.
Yes, it's Brazil. It's Brazil.
It's Brazil.
Yep.
There's a scene where there's a terrorist attack in a French restaurant. And the funny thing is all of a sudden it's like they're kind of like shocked for a second, but then like the maitre d' comes up and he starts apologizing for the problems and he's talking and trying to work them through the menu as people are sitting up like these barriers so they physically can't see it happening.
Like an explosion has occurred. There are people maimed.
Screaming and maimed on the other side. But to them, like that whole thing disappears when the maitre d' comes over and the classic great French restaurant service style, and they put up these little barriers so they don't have to witness this horrible thing.
Oh, it'd be embarrassing to show reaction to this.
Yeah, but really, it's a powerful statement about that world. And it's one of the most powerful, to me, it's probably the most memorable scene of the movie.
Which is saying something. That movie has a lot of weird and extreme scenes.
Yes. But, it's about the action and reaction. And once again, the benefit of the storyboarding is you might not even think about that. What is the reaction if someone gets cut down in the street? Or if the king kills the father, you're thinking about the actual strict action of the two people. But you can maybe enrich the story and make it better by realizing that if it's in the middle of a banquet And like I said, all of the lords are there. What are their reactions to it? You can have a lot of fun with that in a story, and start pulling out more details. Start maybe pulling out more reasons for tensions between the protagonist and the antagonist by just taking the time to step back and look at it like it's a picture.
You can also do the same thing. You have the same power to switch that up. You can have a heavy-handed scene of something that would normally be significant, and you can pull away from the power of that to focus it on something else. Like, for instance, let's say you have that exact same scene. We have a big gathering. You have the people, and you have the king, and he stabs his brother in front of all of these people. But it's no longer important to you to have the perspective be this emotional attachment, and thus you've been showing the perspective from the daughter of the uncle. But instead, you're showing the perspective of a pickpocket. It's like, oh, good, there's something big going on up there. Everyone's distracted. I'll be able to get lots of change purses today. And now you've totally taken this super huge thing, and you've totally changed the dynamic of it just by changing the perspective. Like, this is the power you wield. So when you create that storyboard and you show, like, this is what's going on here, so this is the distraction, and here's what's happening. Like, you have the ability to really manipulate your audience, even though it's the same room. It's the same room. It's the same occurrence. But for everybody, it's going to happen differently.
And really, the whole motions of the scenes are all based off of what you're describing in them. And if you, like I said, if you leave holes, people will fill them in, which might be a strategic thing to do. But understand too that it might not be the thing that you think that they're going to fill in. I mean, if more than two people read it, they're going to probably start disagreeing on what something means, even if you have all of the details.
Yeah, that's true.
But,
I mean, look at when you and I talked about Excalibur. I mean, we're talking about a visual media and an auditory media, so that we literally watched the exact same thing, but we talked about one specific scene that you and I completely interpreted differently. So even with the advent of all those things, without any blanks, I chose to see it one way and you chose to see it another.
Yeah. And both are very valid from the description of the scene. You'd be like, oh, of course it's magic because, Merlin is involved. Or if you're watching the scene...
Of course it's valor because Arthur is involved.
and you see like the guy's face just soften. Like it's there. He's going to take Arthur down. And then also his face just softens. And so if you're focused on the face softening, you're seeing him go, he just is recognizing Arthur. But, if you're listening to the music, you go, oh, this is magic. Magic. Which is making him do it. Or maybe it's both. Who knows? But, I mean, the thing is, I'm a big believer in leaving the reader with agency over a lot in the book.
I'm glad you used that word. I like the usage of that.
But realize that when you take those risks, and even if you try not to take those risks, they will take their own agency, which is why to me, it's like a lot of monster horror movies never really work on me because they show me the monster. I'm like, nah, I don't buy it.
What do you mean?
That doesn't work for me. I don't find it frightening.
Okay.
Whatever. To me, when I see the monster in a monster movie, it ruins the monster movie for me. But you need the monster in the monster movie for the monster movie to work. So it's kind of a catch-22.
Well, I think is your point that you would rather see a part of the monster, or better yet, a reaction to the monster instead of the monster itself. So then the presence of the monster is very much there without seeing the visual of the monster.
Yeah, it's like I don't want it to be 100% given to me because I want the ability to fill in the blanks with things that frighten me. And when you show it to me and give me 100% look at the monster, I lose it at those moments with monsters. Very rarely am I frightened, even like with an alien. Once they showed the alien to me, it lost its fear. Which it shouldn't have because they look horrific. And I could see why people would still be freaked out by them. It just didn't work for me. Sorry.
So next on here, we're also talking about sets and movement. And while you're doing the storyboard itself, especially, I mean, if we're not talking about a gigantic like crowd scene, you should number and position the characters. That way.
And I'm a big fan here where I'm not worried so much about all of the details, is where are their location in reference to each other. Even if it's just a thing, what's their distance? Do they need to elevate their voice just to be heard? I kind of like to have a top-down view of at least where it starts and where it ends. And it's more of a map type of storyboard here. But that's very valid for writing because, once again, you're filling in the details. But I like to know the set and where the characters are within the set. Even though a lot of my sets are very simple, like you go into these sort of Iron Age huts, and they're round rooms with thatched roofs and some piss in the walls. Maybe a stool if they're rich.
Oh, we dreamed of a stool. You lived in a corridor?
That's right. Well, we lived in a paper bag and a septic tank, but to us it was home.
At night, our father would slash us in half with a butter knife a half hour before we had to go to wake up. We had to go to bed a half hour before we got up to go to work.
So, how many times will Monty Python slip in tonight? Several.
I don't know.
But there's nothing wrong with Monty Python filling in the blanks of a show.
Absolutely not.
But once again, to track movement.
So before we move on to the next one, I think the big thing is keep in mind the physical. Keep in mind your big set pieces, the people involved, what's physically in the way of what I'm just going to call point A to point B. Point A to point B might be this character has to walk across the room. Point A to point B might be this character needs to fight this character. Point A to point B might be the car is traveling through the scene and it's going to strike something, or this character is going to interact with whatever, like this guy's swinging off the pirate ship from one mast to the other. That's the point A to point B. So you need to know what is in between, like what is physically in between and what is action, emotion, reaction occurring between points A and points B in time.
And remember too, it's like, as a storyteller, you got to choose what you're sharing perspectively with people. And so, like, there was a great scene in The World According to Garp,
gosh.
And I say this, and this is a spoiler.
I love that book. Oh my God, I love that book.
But throughout it, whenever he'd go home, he would always flip his lights off and pull into the driveway. And it was fun at times, but during the climax of the book, he's sitting there and he's angry because he knows his wife is at home with this other man, and he does it just out of thing, and you're kind of watching his face and him brooding over this thing, and what you don't see, which they could have changed by changing the way you look at the scene, was when he pulled into the driveway. I think it was he pulled into the driveway. The car was there and he smashed right into it.
Yeah, the setup is that he made a game out of pulling into the driveway for his child. So his child is in the backseat, very young child, he's like 4 years old. And at night, when you're safe, the driveway's right there. He would shut his lights off, and his son would be like, and just as he got into the driveway, he would turn the lights back on and park the car. But on this particular night, him turning the lights off, he wasn't able to see that there was already a car in the driveway.
Yeah. And one of the things I want you to keep in mind, too, is, and this is kind of making me think of my days as an actor. Look at the scene, the set, the props that you've made up, even if they're not going to show up in the book, with an actor's eye from the perspective of the characters. The character's likes, the character's dislikes, their motivations. Try and take on that character and look at the scene. Because as an actor, when you're acting, when you step into a set and you start to see it come together, even though you're going to be delivering the same lines, you will get inspired by the props, by the things in your hand, by the things over there, because they're there. And sometimes you have to go, no, I want to ignore that because it's irrelevant to where I'm going, or it's something I don't want to share. But think of it like from the character's perspective as an actor. What should catch their eye? How should they react because there's such a distance between them and the other character? Think about it like an actor in a role. So you're taking on the role of the character and looking at all of the prop pieces and the set and going, ooh, how can I play with this? How can I steal the scene? And you might not want them to, but think about it that way because this I think can help find details, which even though, like I said, I like to leave a lot open, I like to give out the details because those are the nuggets that people will crunch onto, and their brain will explode and their imagination will fill in a lot of the rest.
So when should people be doing these storyboards?
I think there are some different approaches to it. If you're really having trouble visualizing the story, I would do it after you write your chapter outline. I would sit down and I would at least do a light storyboard, maybe just the one slide per scene kind of a storyboard to walk you through the story. But I think the more important time is right before you write the chapter. That's when you kind of want to get a more detailed look at the chapter because now you have the detail of the stories before it that are influencing what's happening now. And it's maybe going to change the perspective of the characters in the scene than what you originally did. So I think you want to be a little bit more comprehensive with it right before you write the chapter. Have a small, that one board per scene kind of sketch, and then break it down into the number of essentially slides you need to be able to get through the chapter because you're going to be more into it. Your characters are going to be able to get more out of it. There's different action or reaction, and don't fall into the trap of thinking that this will let you control the story, because still things are going to happen because of the characters stealing scenes, which they'll do to you just the same way actors will do to directors. They'll try and steal a scene because of something that catches their eye. And if it works, let them and just go with the flow and rework it as you go. But, it's like either if you're really struggling with visualizing your story, do enough of one at the beginning, at least one board per scene to get an idea of the flow of the story. Once you can start visualizing the way the story's happening before you write a chapter, make it a little bit more comprehensive one for that chapter, but just to visualize what's happening in that chapter. But I think that will really go a long way to help people be able to visualize. And once you can visualize it, you're then only struggling with getting words on paper. And then in your second draft, making those words perfect.
And I would also encourage to be understanding of whatever serves you. So if you write out the storyboard and you start to write the story and you realize that what you want to write is going to contradict the board, but what you're going to write is going to be better, then you have license to change it. Like just because you did it on the story,
not a law.
Just because you did the storyboard is a guide to serve you. It is not a rule of law.
And because you're going to find out, and when you visualize the story, sometimes when you're in that moment of what I like to call puking out the story, is you're going to see a better path. And if it feels like a better path, just go with it. And that's why I always say, get more detailed right before you write the chapter, because maybe that has influenced some of your plot or some of the other things that will happen throughout the story. But definitely let the artist take over and just sort of buzz where it needs to while it's going. And if it doesn't feel perfect and you follow the storyboard, don't worry about it. Just when that chapter gets done, remember it's draft one. Second draft is when you kind of go back through and reread it. It might work better in the whole flow of the story, or maybe at that point you change the scene, but leave that for draft two. Now, for the world builder's task of the day, take a scene that you've written or you're about to write and just create a short storyboard for it. That's it. Just create a short storyboard for it.
And then when you're done doing the storyboard, the real world task of the day is to share it in the Undercroft group.
And once again, the URL for that is facebook.com/groups/Undercroft.
And obviously the weather is getting warmer. So when you're going to Amazon to buy all of your summer needs, please do it through www.garduel.com/Amazon for all of your Amazon purchasing needs, because it helps out the show. And we'll guarantee that we keep bringing you quality content like this.
You'll get just what you deserve.
Double XP. If you can prove it with a receipt.
Thank you so much for listening to the World Builders Anvil. We would love it if you would share the World Builders Anvil with 2 of your friends, and so would they. If they are unfamiliar with podcasts, then you get to introduce them to the wonderful world of podcasting by showing them Stitcher or iTunes, or, best of all, just send them to our website, www.garduel.com. That's GARDUL.com.
Now strike while the mithril's hot.